In this video, we're going to continue talking about the topics in financial management. So, goal of financial management, part one. What should be the goal of a corporation? Should it be to maximize profit? Should it be to minimize costs? Maximize market share? That's another way to say more revenue. Well, the way we like to define it is the goal of financial management is to maximize the current value per share of the company's existing stock. So bring up the share price, maximize the share price, one way to say shortly. Now, can you do that through maximizing profits? Yes. Can you do that through minimizing cost? Sure. Can you do that through maximizing market share? Also, yes. However, those items may not always bring up the value per share. One quick example, we're not going to get into much detail here. So minimize cost. Yes, if you lower your cost, your profit could go up. If your revenues are the same and your costs are minimized, your profits will be maximized in that sense. However, we have to be careful because it's less about that you minimize cost, but how did you minimize cost? If the analysts of a company and eventually shareholders believe that, hey, you minimize cost, that's great, but you did it through cutting things that are necessary for the company to survive in the long term. Let's say where there's quality, production levels, whatever the case may be. But if the analysts and the investors believe that the way the costs were minimized are going to affect the company in the long run, they're going to bring the stock price down by selling stock. So it's less about which one you accomplish from these, which they're important, but how did you accomplish these? And where and what direction is the company going in the future as you do those? So the general idea is maximizing the value per share, but be careful because while these get you there, it's important to know how are you achieving those, not just that you're achieving them. Another way to say it is maximize the market value of the existing owner's equity. Now, this, you can see it as per share. This is what we call the capitalization of the company, the cap, and the market capitalization. And all it is just the price per share multiplied by the shares outstanding. So they both mean the same, really. Just one is talking about the total, one is talking about the value per share, the individual share. Okay, let's say part two of goal of financial management. Does this mean we should do anything and everything to maximize owners' wealth? Well, now let's take it to the next step. So there's some ethical issues as well. And going back to the long-term sustainability and life of the company. You heard about outsourcing, offshoring. Enron, if you haven't heard of Enron, it was a company that had a very, very bad outcome by doing all kinds of financial shenanigans, I should say, or tricks, many of them illegal, and they ended up bankrupt and hurt a lot of people. Corporate support of charities. In other words, should they be socially responsible, and how much should they be, at what level? Because yes, we could agree that it's important for companies to have social responsibility. However, if you go too much on social responsibility, it can actually hurt the value of a company because then you're still a business that needs to make a profit. Let's talk about the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. Well, we spoke about Enron here, right? That's the poster child for this act to come about in 2002. However, there was a lot of companies that had a lot of troubles in the 90s and then culminating with Enron that were doing all kinds of financial tricks and accounting backflips and gymnastics, you're going to call it. And it was just hurting the economy a lot. So they had to pass a stricter set of rules in order to avoid what these companies were doing. Intended to strengthen protection against accounting fraud and financial malpractice, which is what these companies were doing. And they were not the only ones. These were just the big ones. Compliance is very costly. So what happens, they had to increase the laws and regulations to prevent that. But now the companies are having extra costs. They need more accountants, more finance people, more process, more lawyers in order to comply with all these things. So it becomes costly. So what happens is then making it a little harder to comply in the United States. Some companies, what they do is they go ahead and move their public entities, their headquarters, to other countries that are not as strict. Then another one is they go private, they go dark. They say, we're not going to be listed anymore. We're not going to sell shares to the public anymore. That also has some disadvantage to the economy as well. More information about this, you can follow a link. It's on the book and the full set of slides. The agency problem. On a previous video, we touched on it. I'll bring it up again. The general idea is that you can own shares in a company, so you are an owner. However, you don't get to run the company or make day-to-day decisions. That'll be the CEO and the other managers and the vice presidents and, all the senior managers, junior managers, anybody running the company. Those are the ones that make the decisions and run the company, not the shareholders. Now, those managers, CEO, etc., may own shares, but that's not what makes them the person or the individuals that run the company. Is their title, their position within the company. So what happens is now this creates a separation that could be a conflict of interest between the CEO, let's say, for example, and the shareholders. The shareholders can elect and, in other words, hire and fire the CEO through a process, a governance process, do a vote, etc. But that is just a governance process, takes time. Meanwhile, the CEO could be making all kinds of decisions that are not in line with what the shareholders want. And that's what the agency problem is. The people running the company are not necessarily the owners of the company, because the shareholders are the owners. And that's what they mean. So that's what I mean. Principal hires an agent to represent its interests. In other words, principal, the shareholders, through the board, hires the CEO. And this way here, stockholders are the principals, managers, agents to run the company. The problem is the conflict of interest between principal and agent. In other words, the agent, being the CEO, for example, may want to do some things that are not in line with what the stockholders want. So when these things happen, that's when we call agency costs. So there's an agency cost involved to that. A quick note on the side, that's why you typically, when you hire CEO, you give them the contract, things like their bonuses and salaries are going to be tied to certain performance measures. So what you do is you get paid if you get these things done. That's to put it that way. And that's how you try to close that gap of the agency problem. But it's never perfect. And typically smart people find ways around things all the time. So do managers act in the shareholders' interest? And this is where the managerial compensation comes into play that I speak about. So you put incentives in their contracts to align management and stockholders' interest. Incentives need to be carefully structured to ensure that they achieve their goal. This is what I mean. Smart people can find ways around it. So there's just a nice way to say you're trying to make that contract airtight, where they can't find ways to cheat and still get the bonus without having to put in the work. Corporate control. A threat of a takeover may result in better management. This is something aside that is not necessarily part of the agency problem, but something that is important to know. that when a company is underperforming, it could be considered undervalued. And somebody from the outside may see, well, you know what? If I change that CEO and those managers, we can get the company producing more and more profitable than what it is right now with what they already have without having to do much, just change the people running it. So that's when you hear in the news that some other entities start buying up stock from the company until they have like a very large stock, and they can then do a threat to buy the company or have enough power through percentage of ownership to then get a CEO fired and things like that. And eventually that's really my corporate control, a takeover. Okay. We're going to stop here at this point, and we will continue at our next video.